Good afternoon. This is the August 15th meeting of the Fairfield Harbor Management Commission. This is Kim Taylor. I'm in the first floor conference room at Sullivan Independence Hall with Don Hyman, Jeff Warren, Jack Herschler, Bill Perugini, George, our alternate, is here, Betty Gabriel, Jeff Stedman, our harbor master Brian LeClaire on the phone, Dave Henry. Eric Sunman, are you with us? Okay, and Doug Metchek is not going to be with us. Let's pledge allegiance to start the meeting off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. The first order of business is approval of the minutes. Betty did her part, but Jeff and I blew it, so we'll have to take care of them at our September meeting. Going forward, my report, right after our last meeting, I emailed Colin Clark at DEEP to let him know of our decision with respect to the clarifying language in the permit granted to 1143 Sasko Hill Road for the dock. As you recall, we changed the last sentence to include sunfish, hobie cats, and lasers, etc., so that the last sentence of that permit reads, "This restriction shall not apply to human-powered vessels, rowboats, canoes, kayaks, paddleboards, etc., or sail-powered vessels without a fixed keel, i.e. sunfish, hobie cats, lasers, etc." Mr. Russo, who represents the developers at 1143 Sasko Hill Road, and Mr. Clark have been in contact about what now is required to officially change the permit to include the language that we said we thought was necessary with respect to vessels to be moored at the end of that pier. On July 24th, I emailed a letter to Mr. Wendt, the Fairfield Planning Director, the TPZ Commissioners, Mr. Baldwin, the Town Attorney, Mr. Bishop, the Conservation Director, Mr. Dilley, the Mill River Wetlands Committee, Mary Beth Hart at DEEP, Mary Hogue, and Mega Jane in the Engineering Department, to remind them that as we discussed here in our meeting, that statutes require that the Commission get 35-day notice of matters that are to be brought up before other commissions in town that impact our jurisdiction. I also mentioned in that letter that we supported the Peregrine Bulkhead project. And finally, and we can talk about this under new business, requested that as the TPZ moves forward with the possible plans to develop the property, the old Exide property, which is known as 2190 Post Road, that those town bodies, which spent literally years involved in the remediation of that property, have a say in how the public space, which is just north of the Post Road, be developed. And at that time, I sent them the presentation put together by Jeff and then I sent it to you guys too, so you wouldn't be so you would know what everybody else was seeing. And I've since asked Betty to put that on the website under documents and files, since if that development proceeds and we are involved, there's some really good information in there that will be essential to any activity that we get involved in. I received an email from Bruce Mansevit asking about the repair of the lower wharf. I know that the harbor master has also received some inquiries about it as well. Dr. Pinto on July 26th, Dr. Pinto is chair of the Connecticut Harbor Management Association, copied us on a letter that he sent to officials in Governor Lamont's administration expressing concern that Mr. Salvatore, who has been our contact at the Connecticut Port Authority and who has been in charge of the SHIP grant program, is being transferred to DOT, and that there is no one left in the SHIP grant program who is familiar with the small harbors and the activity that that has warranted awarding those SHIP grants in the past and that may in the future. And I'm not sure if Dr. Pinto had another meeting, follow-up meeting, and where that potential transfer stands. I'm sure Jeff has some information about that for us as well. Any questions? Okay, great. Mr. LeClaire, Harbor Master report.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Pleased to report that we have full occupancy at all moorings in the harbor. We've checked all the vessels for stickers, registrations, etc. Everyone is current and on their spots. Number of vessels have been added to the wait list by paying their fee, looking for a spot. We get weekly inquiries, I do, of people that want immediate access. They're either a realtor selling a house and someone has a boat, how big a boat could I squeeze in the harbor now, to, could I get in there this year? So we get them on the waiting list if they're interested. I've been out there on patrol on weekends, some weekdays. No significant issues. There were a number of boats at Yee Yacht Yard that were unregistered with the state or had expired Yee Yacht Yard stickers, so I alerted Justin Cathcart to that. There's about a half dozen boats. Before I give them tickets, I told them, reach out to the people, get them to straighten it out, and most of them have done that already. Just a few vessels speeding in the channel, which we've spoke to them, and as expected, they're out-of-town folks that are not from Southport who come in too fast. We just stop them and get them to slow down. One vessel out of the channel, he needed a little redirection to avoid running aground with his large power boat. He got a little confused on where the channel was. And we had one vessel improperly secured, so we took care of that. It got itself 90 degrees to the channel because of excessive scope on its mooring line, so it was sticking into the channel. But that was easy enough to resolve. The questions I typically get, just so you know, from boaters that flag me down or folks on shore are always about dredging. That is the hot topic there that more people want to know about than anything. Especially at low tides, folks will ask me as it gets very narrow as they come in. Regarding incidents, there is only one incident to report. There was a minor accident involving two Pequot Yacht Club Ideal 18s that were reported. Significant damage to one of the boats, but nobody injured. The boat was repaired. The person who T-boned the other boat admitted responsibility. So a little sailboat racing incident, basically, that they advised me of. No rescue was required. It was just a simple accident, but they have to tell me of accidents that happen in our area. Speaking of Pequot Yacht Club, they had a safe sailing season, and I think their training went well. It seemed to me every time I observed it, everything was well under control. And there was a lot of courtesy exhibited by all the vessels in the harbor, not only the youth going out or getting towed out, but the larger vessels maneuvering around them. There's a great relationship with the boats, as you know, any of you that go out there, yielding right-of-ways and just relaxing a little bit and letting the boats under sail, clear the channel and the narrow parts if you're coming through the bigger vessel. That's the lower wharf. So we talked about this last meeting of this commission because I made a call that afternoon to the town inquiring whether the town can take off the dock structure, whether they had the equipment and the ability, and how far down they would take it. And they were going to take a look at it. So I got a call the next afternoon after the meeting. Well, I told them, we'll get back to them. Kim or I would get back to them after the meeting on that Tuesday evening last month. And let them know what the decision was. So the next day, before I called them, I got a call from someone that they're gone. The piers are gone. Public Works sent someone out there immediately, took a look at it, and determined that they had to get these down, and took them down. I went out there and looked at them. They took 2 days to do it. They took the portions that were taken off and put them on Perry Green overnight. So I went and took a bunch of pictures. They were rotted. The structures that were taken out had significant internal rot. Some bolts were going through rotted, so they were as bad as we thought, and it was inevitable they would have come off, I think, either with people on them, which we were concerned about, trying to get on them for fishing or swimming, or more importantly, if wave action could have sent them loose and floating in the channel or out where there's a big danger to safety if you're in a power boat and you plow, or a big sailboat and you plow into something floating under the water. So it was removed. Lots of compliments from the boaters. Everyone seems very happy, as well as people on shore like the fact that the eyesores were removed, as they called it, since they couldn't get out to them and use them. Spoke to a number of fishermen. They're happy with their gone, too. It makes it a little easier to cast. And some have asked if we can take down, if you look at the structure, there's a number of pilings on the north and the south side, the tall pilings. And if you look at it, the tallest pilings are by the channel. The shorter ones are closer by shore. And the shorter ones are cut to a height that even at a high tide, they still stick out enough that you could see them, obviously. A number of fishermen have questioned whether we can take down a section of pilings, probably as big as this table, in the middle of where the two docks were. So, if I may point, this all came out, and you can see the large pilings on the outside. Well, there's a number of small ones in this middle area. Some fishermen inquired whether we can take those out to the ground for now to make a hole for fishing. So when there's a current, some of them showed me, you put the line, it starts drifting. It gets tangled up if you're not careful. So I just want to pass that on to you. And marine life. So not many fish in the harbor yet. Fishermen are pulling in very small legal fish, very small amounts of legal fish. But there was a beautiful turtle I saw last Friday by the yacht club. It had to be at least 18 inches, if not more, going along the shore right by Pequot Yacht Club. It was just beautiful right under the surface. And we've seen blue crabs that are of legal size. So that's great that the crabs are back in the harbor as well, something we lost a number of years ago, and they seem to be doing just fine. So that's all good news. So that is my report, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Any questions for the Harbor Master?
Are there any questions as to the hazard of navigation of those pilings?
No. Not concerned about that, because the outer pilings by the channel are the same ones that were always there, and they are close enough and tall enough, and that I don't think there's a need to put the buoy. We have an extra danger buoy. I don't really think it's necessary, because if you look, and I've got some pictures I can show you on my phone, coming in, those are very large pilings on the water side that make kind of a perimeter. And there's no way you can really squeeze. If you're able to squeeze between them and the shore, you're on a very small boat.
Right.
You could probably a kayak that can get through there anyways. There's no way anyone would try to get a boat in there. And I can't imagine someone trying to dock between the pilings and the lower wharf either. So I think it's okay. Yeah.
Any other questions for the Harbor Master? Okay, thank you, Brian. Lower wharf repairs, Jeff, I expected Devin to be here. Devin, are you on the phone? Okay.
Oh, can I add one more thing?
Of
I just
course.
thought of one more thing looking at my pictures. I forgot to add that just something I noted at the mooring committee meeting. At low tide 2 weeks ago, we had about a third of the boats at Yee Yacht Yard at what I call the whaler dock, the dock closest to the launch ramp. Only a third of the boats were able to float at low tide. The rest were all sitting on the hard. So it's shallow there, and it may be getting more shallow as the years go on. So something we have to put out, this commission should put out its long-term planning hat and think about that, of the boats, none of the boats on the dock, first dock coming out closest to the launch ramp, none on the side of the ramp had water all the way to the end at low tide. On the other side of it, where I keep my boat at the end, I was the only boat that could float at low tide on my whaler. And when I say float, we're talking an inch or two under that I would have had to paddle out. All the other boats in the middle had no water. The fire boat at the end had enough. And then looking at the far side by the channel, the first couple of boats by shore didn't have enough water. It's only the further boats. So just something I think we should not forget about. Not a lot we can do about it, but there may have to be a plan B at some point if this starts to fill in even more.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Questions? Okay. Lower wharf repairs, Mr. Stedman?
I don't have a report to give, other than we just talked with the former president of the Sasquatch Association, and the deed calls for them to have an advisory role in what takes place at the pier. And so he advised that we write basically what we're asking Sasquatch to consider, and that they have a committee that will discuss that and provide recommendations to us. So we explained that the reason that the dock was, that parts of it were removed was for public safety purposes. We didn't have any issue with that. But we do have to discuss future, whether there's a goal to restore the whole structure as it previously existed or not. So we'll put something together. We just talked with a fellow today. We'll put something together. And then were we also awaiting Race's cost estimate for
Race was going to have
getting an additional approval to restore the North Pier?
Right. We're waiting for, Mr. Santa was going to talk with the folks at DEEP about whether it made sense to get a COP or to get a COP for the northern dock, or whether it would be a general permit, and also to let them know that we had to take down the structure for safety reasons, and just so that they were not caught off guard when we went after them. But
and I didn't want to communicate with Deep and interfere with what he was doing.
So okay. Just for the commission's information, the deed restrictions number 10 of the 10 deed restrictions for the Lower Wharf property says the existing or similar dock configuration is to be maintained by the Fairfield Harbor Management Commission, and no changes are to be made thereto without consultation with the Sasquatch Association. So, consultation, we need to let them know that it came down for safety reasons, and that I think they do know.
Yeah, we talked about that before, but as far as in future plans,
right,
we need to write to them and explain what we're proposing to do, and get their input.
So Jeff and I will follow up with that.
Just a question. So in the Sasquatch organization is a neighborhood organization comprised of residents of the
Southport.
Throughout all of Southport, or just the
Harbor Road area, I think.
Oh, well, I think it extends beyond that, because they have Jeff?
It's the Sasquatch Association for Southport Improvement, so I don't know.
Okay.
Assuming it was larger than just the Harbor Road, but I don't know that.
Yeah.
But they're also mentioned in the Perry Green deed. And so when the town acquired the Lower Wharf, I don't know if Sasquatch Group itself donated money, but certainly its members did. And then there was the understanding that they would be treated the same way in that deed as with the Perry Green deed.
So I presume it's a long-standing organization.
Oh, yeah.
How many members approximately?
A lot.
Like how many, roughly?
A lot. I've been to meetings.
200, 300?
Yeah, could be.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Enough to fill the Pequot Library big hall.
Okay, so a very engaged organization.
Do they do funding? That's why I was thinking as you were talking. Do they do funding of initiatives? I'm trying to remember things that through the years.
I have to remember.
I think they do. They funded the renovation of the open space area.
Right.
And put in trails and amusements and things like that for the kids and others.
And years ago, there was also discussion of I can't remember to what extent they were, as an organization, involved. There's also development stuff that was being discussed. So. I was just wondering if it's an option for potential additional support for the SHIP grants, or not an option.
The Harbor Commission's contribution to the purchase of the Lower Wharf was either $50,000 or $60,000, but that was the least contribution. And I don't know if Sasquatch itself, but Sasquatch had a role in funding the acquisition of that, whether it was through their members or as a group. They had a substantial role in it.
I mean, given the realities that we're thinking about for timing for SHIP grants, if best case, there may be interest, at least exploring with that possibility.
Right, all the more reason why we need to be in touch and let them know
Yeah.
what we've done and what we're
We'll
thinking.
do that now.
Yeah, okay. Any questions? Any other questions? Okay, SHIP grant refund, where does that,
I haven't
Stand.
finished that. And
okay,
the other interesting, you mentioned the SHIP grants, and you mentioned Dr. Pinto's letter. So the person that we've dealt with at the Port Authority since 2014 was recently reassigned back to the Department of Transportation. So currently, there is no person at the SHIP, at the Port Authority with maritime-related experience. And we're told that we'll need to communicate with the acting executive director. To answer your question, there was a committee meeting of the Port Authority last week to discuss this employment situation. A number of people commented in the public part of the hearing, expressing concern about the continuity of these maritime programs, that the only person who had experience in them was reassigned. And the chair said, thank you for your comments. They went into an executive session, but then the transfer continued. That person is now back working at the DOT, and we're going to have to develop another relationship with the Port Authority. And then there's also the uncertainty as to whether the SHIP grants will continue, because the legislature this past session cut in half the previously authorized amounts that they can distribute in grants, in part because of the overruns at the state pier. So our hope had been that the funding of the the replacement of the Lower Wharf Pier would be funded by a SHIP grant, and the town allocated the 20% cost share to match that. So now that's uncertain as to how that project will be funded. But that doesn't delay needing to get the reimbursement back. But nobody's yelling at us now to do it. But we have to do it, and Betty did all the work, and we just have to put it together.
right. Right, and I think the town would like us to.
Yes.
To clean it up.
Clean that up and get it out
Yeah,
of the way.
yeah, okay.
When I asked Mr. Salvatore about it, he said, well, you gotta deal with the executive director now. I don't have any role in it.
Okay. Any questions? Alrighty, Lower Wharf Risk Assessment and Rules, Mr. Hyman?
Thank you. Yesterday, George Harris and I met with Peter Ritchie, the risk manager for the town, with Doug Novak of Parks, I think he's Parks Superintendent, and Carlos Montiero of DPW. I don't remember what his title is, but
He's in DPW.
he is with DPW. But we had a very positive meeting in this room for about an hour and kind of basically mapped out a pathway to communicate messages on signs that would address the risks at Lower Wharf. The risks are of a variety of sources. One is from the risk management report that was done in February. I think you're familiar with that. Those are pretty straightforward. They talk about swimming, uneven surfaces, unsupervised children, sudden drops, off Lower Wharf. Things that I think are pretty straightforward and that we would all recognize and are familiar with. Then there's kind of another category of risk that we are looking at, and that relates to deed restriction, because we've gotten some communication from others that we were obliged to put signs up regarding certain aspects of it, of the deed language, including things, some of them are straightforward and understandable, others like sunbathing and lawn chairs are a little curious, but they're in that deed and we have to kind of deal with that. So we will deal with that. And then there is the historic issue, like it or not, of dogs, and dogs there. And that kind of brings up this really interesting question that we talked about at length, because there were some at the meeting, in particular Doug Novak, that was under the impression that the Lower Wharf was a park. And we said, is it a park or is it an open space? The deed uses open space several times. And the language of the deed talks about a piece of land that has more of an open space nature to it than a park nature to it. And we argued that it should be viewed as an open space. This becomes important because dog regulations are different on open spaces than in parks. And I was very happy to see that there was, interest in this. The Parks Department was quite prepared to say, okay, well, let's talk with conservation. If they want to see this as open space, we'll step back on the dog part, and you can manage it as an open space. All that was to be determined. Peter Ritchie was to go and talk with the conservation people. We don't have a definite answer on that, but I'm optimistic that it will be kind of designated as an open space versus a park. We meet again the last week in August, I think August 29th, and we'll hear more about that. The town attorney is reviewing this question, of course, as you might imagine. And we're committed to being very kind of transparent with the agencies that we have to deal with and organizations, including Sasquatch. We'd rather kind of be upfront with them than surprise them on anything. And so I think it's my hope to bring them in when we're a little bit further along on content and design of sign or signs, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, to have them weigh in. George is going to be talking to the Historic District Commission to find out what role, if any, they see for themselves in this in terms of the aesthetics of the sign or signs and placement of the signs.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Who did you say was looking at that?
George.
George.
This George.
You just, okay, I'm sorry.
No, I asked him and he was kind enough to agree to, we're at an early point. I didn't want to, we don't have a lot of details that's locked up to confirm with them. I wanted to understand what the best practices are for dealing with them, what the guidelines might be for dealing with them, because I don't know what they are. And I don't know what their broad parameters might be for something like this. I'd rather know it before than be told further down the road. But there was good communication, and everybody, I think, was looking forward to kind of creating this win-win situation. Peter Ritchie's initial concept for a sign, I think we all thought was very sensible. There would be, if you're walking towards Lower Wharf from the yacht yard parking area, you come upon that rock wall, and then there's an opening in the rock wall, and you make a left and walk in. To the right is the Sound, to the left is the harbor, north. He proposed a tasteful sign that you would see as you make that left, that would have the information on it that we're looking for. There might be in some areas, like where there's risk of swimming, a reminder of no swimming, because that's so important. But it would be kind of one aesthetically attractive, acceptable list of do's and don'ts at Lower Wharf. What the do's and don'ts are, we want to keep it simple. We want to keep it clear. We don't want to create a big volume of wording that is puzzling and creates more problems than we can. So I think we'll err on the side of being simple rather than being complicated. That's where we are at the moment. I did draft placeholder language about dogs that are consistent with the town's regulations on dogs and consistent with that section of the town regulation that deals with dogs on open space, which is quite different than parks or beach. Dog on open space is required to be either on a leash or under the control of the dog owner. It's one or the other, or both. And then we added some language about, just out of consideration, there's language in there about picking up waste and keeping the place beautiful for everyone to use. And it'll be that simple. And that's where we are. So I think there's been just some time, good momentum, the traction, we're having conversation, we know who has to weigh in on this. I think we all understand how sensitive it could be and how the neighbors put this under a microscope, and we have to proceed accordingly.
Great effort, great results so far. Thank you both. Really, really good. Jeff, you had?
Just a couple of questions, Don, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This deed is missing a second page. It goes 118 and 119 is missing.
Okay.
And when we worked on this deed, and I say we, the Harbor Commission and Attorney Saxel, and I don't know if it's specified in this, do you have page 119?
I have that page. This is the town law, I'm told.
Yeah, it's not.
No, I don't have
But
it.
the understanding was that.
Remember, it was sent out initially, this was a couple of years ago, and it was missing a page, and it was resent out, so you.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, then this is.
But the only point I was going to make is that it was always the understanding, from my recollection, that the responsibility for managing this area was with the Harbor Management Commission. And it wasn't an open space area or it wasn't a park. It was its own special area, and that's when it's referred to in here as a public green. So the open space areas, they have a specific legal basis. So when the town accepted or obtained state and federal grants for the open space properties, when they were accepted, that the RTM had to designate someone in the agency in the town to manage them. And so the Conservation Commission was designated as the manager of those open space properties. And the parks is something different. So my understanding was, and the commission talked about this for a long time, about developing its own regulations for the use and operation of this, and that never did. But the idea was that the commission could develop its regulations the procedure is set forth in the town code, just like you do the mooring rules and publish it in the newspaper and have a hearing. But the dogs, again, the regulations concerning dogs, those are specific to the open space areas. We could look at that as guidance and maybe do something similar, but it doesn't apply to this area now. It would have to be applied through a separate regulation.
Well, I think the town attorney is looking at that, because frankly, I think there's some ambiguity here. It says open space in this language 2 or 3 times.
What's he looking at, John?
So Jeff, you're suggesting it's neither open space nor a park?
That's my understanding. Neither. It's a special area that was, in a way, similar to Perry Green, with Sasquatch having an oversight role, but the authority was specifically given to the Harbor Management Commission for management of it, not to the Park Commission and not to Conservation.
So there's the ambiguous, it's neither a park nor open space. And what was the term that you used?
The term that I was looking at here, the premises shall be used as a public green.
Public green, that's what I thought.
But if you read further in the same sentence, shall be maintained as an unimproved open space.
Well, I think that's a description rather than a legal definition of what the town's open space areas are.
So what you're suggesting, Justin, it's under our purview?
That's my understanding. It's always been under the commission's purview to make regulations as they wish to do.
Whereas if it were a park, it'd be under park and rec or open space.
Or the
under
Conservation Commission. Yeah.
So it's on us.
And we made, I think also, in fairness, Peter Ritchie, the risk manager, was candid at the outset saying he didn't know of our role. He's a new person relatively. He wasn't familiar with the fact that we had this oversight responsibility. And now he does. And that's not being argued. What is still ambiguous, and what the town attorney is it open space or park? It's not park or green or something other than that. There's an ambiguity here. I don't think it's black and white, Jeff.
It's up to you, you guys.
Well, it's
can
not
do it, but
actually up to me either, or you. It's up to the town attorney, more than anybody else.
It's really subject to interpretation, I think. Like, he could have his interpretation, we could have ours. I mean, it's subject
I'd have
to.
to go back and look at the page 119 in the deed, though.
In this situation, those of us in the room talking about it felt it helped us to consider this more of it as an open space in the park, which has some very clearly defined restrictions to it. So that's the ambiguity that we're going to work through.
But I don't think the commission can be a manager of an open space property. And that was my concern, because that's specifically assigned to the Conservation Commission, and it had to do with the acceptance of the monies. Well, anyway, discussion.
Richie is talking to the Conservation Director, is it Davis?
Mr. Bishop.
About this point, and the dialogue continues. It hasn't been decided, I'm just reporting on what the issues are that we're...
Should we make sure we share that with
I wouldn't
Mr.
give up,
Ritchie?
I wouldn't
I
want
believe
to
Mr.
give up management authority of this to the Conservation Commission.
Richie has this.
You would suggest we not?
Not.
Yeah, because it's part of our purview.
Yeah, and plus the commission contributed to the acquisition of it. And
So we would want it to be identified as was stipulated. Because if we don't want to give it up to Parks, nor do we want to give it up to.
Well, that would be my recommendation, because now we're pursuing the rebuilding of the pier, applying for the permit application. We want to be able to do that without having to get permission from another town entity that would have responsibility.
Why contribute to the bureaucracy and the number of channels?
And that's something else to discuss with Sasquatch, because that would, well, anyway, I just raising my points, because we sat in the second floor conference room with Attorney Saxel and went over the language of this deed. I wish I had the second page.
Jack, you had?
Isn't this what we're calling Lower Wharf really two separate deeded properties now because of the acquisition of that piece that slice that we got on? And I guess my question is, if that's so, what's the definition and the character of the piece that was acquired, which is specifically where the dogs are doing their exercising down by the water? Because what's the character of that property versus we already have a description of the Lower Wharf itself, but we're actually talking about in part at least the beach area, which was the acquired property, not part of the original Lower Wharf.
It was understood that since it adjoins the area that the Harbor Management Commission has authority over, it was logical to assign the commission the authority.
I remember that. I guess I'm wondering if there's any characterization of what that additional property is different than the description of a green and the other one.
That was never categorized.
Right, so
that's about it being a beach, and if it was a beach, it had to be managed by Parks and Rec.
Right, so it seems like we should get this. It's more complicated than just what's the nature of the Lower Wharf deed. It's also the question about the particular piece, which is the beach part, which we're concerned about here.
Well, we have that. That's part of and I think I've sent this all to you several times. I know I can never find it when I want it, but it.
Does yours have the full, all 3 pages?
That's.
When I printed it out, I only got 2 pages, but that could be my fault. I could have.
Well, on the old one is, the incorrect one's getting distributed again.
So we'll ask Betty to, if you wouldn't mind, going back to finding the one. And
I'm trying to find it now.
Okay, and we'll send it out to everybody, but on my incorrect copy, the 3rd page is about the new parcel.
Okay. Different deed or same deed absorbed into is it all one deed now?
I have no idea how that works. It's recorded
2 deeds.
Oh, it's two different ones, and we asked the town attorney to give an opinion on that, because we anticipated or expected that they would before the property transfer was
right.
We just want one set of rules for both pieces of it.
Exactly.
That's where I'm coming from.
Exactly.
Let's keep this as simple as possible with one set of rules.
I want to assure you that, nothing that we talk about could be interpreted that we're going to give up control of that land to another town agency. But I think there is some ambiguity here that needs to be addressed and considered, and the town attorney will weigh in. I know that he'll be looking at this closely.
Good. we asked a number of questions at the time of the transfer, right? And we never
Yeah,
received
that should be part of the record, or the
We never
materials that
received
the
an answer.
attorney reviews.
Right. And maybe if we can find that letter, 2019 letter to the town, to the TPZ?
Oh, we have that. I'm thinking of the old, when the property was acquired. And there were a lot of discussions, well, again, I'm just recalling them. And that Sasquatch wanted to protect it for the character of the neighborhood, and it was agreed that the Harbor Commission would, well, anyway,
Right.
I'm going on about it.
But I'm wondering if, since we didn't get, when the second parcel was transferred to the town, the Harbor Commission asked a number of questions.
Yeah, we had that. That's
And
easy.
Didn't get an
perhaps,
answer.
and never got an
Never
answer.
got an answer.
And perhaps that, and we've kind of danced around
We
it.
talked about putting that in the updated harbor management plan
Yeah.
and making it clear our
Making it clear.
understanding in the harbor management plan,
Exactly
but we haven't finished that yet either.
Right. But maybe if we get Don that letter,
Right.
then it would be appropriate for you to ask Mr. Baldwin again for his opinion of the answer to some of those questions, which talked about the use and the responsibilities and all of that of the second parcel.
Each part.
Otherwise known as a beach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Bill?
I didn't realize there were so many nuances between park and open space. What was the term that you think in town green? Was that the term?
Public green.
Public green,
Public green.
I think I saw some harbor green, I think, was.
But it was to be distinct from open space and
And park.
Park.
Sure. No, it makes sense.
As a technical term, but not necessarily as open space small o.
Right.
Because it's gonna be open space, but open space capital
Got
O
it.
is a different,
And that legal sort of
yeah,
interpretation,
yeah, it's
right?
a different
You know,
animal.
here's where it gets tricky. As you walk around town, if you go to Ash Creek, that area is categorized as open space, okay? If you go along Pine Creek, you walk the trail system, that area is categorized as open space. How similar is Lower Wharf to any of those? A little here, but not there, a little here, but not there, you know,
But it's tricky. You bring up an interesting point. Again, I haven't visited all the open spaces throughout town, but they're always marked that way. There's always that standardized sign, and they're always labeled open space. Conceivably, there might be some implication of that, I guess, and you're right, because the Lower Wharf doesn't have that moniker. I don't know if that's relevant or
The
not.
Ash Creek area, the Penfield Mills and Ash Creek area, the property was acquired with state and federal grants. I forget which was, but it was acquired for a specific purpose. And when the RTM accepted those monies, it identified who in the town was responsible for managing it. That's like Lake Mohegan and all of these other areas.
Salt marsh.
They were specific, they were accepted and the authority was granted to conservation to manage them as open space areas. So there's no, this was acquired differently. And it was understood that the Harbor Commission would be responsible. In fact, the deed allows for the community sailing dock managed by the Harbor Commission to be built, or as part of our improvement plan. That we eliminated that because of the ledge that we found and the added cost to drill the pilings. But it's a different thing, Don, than the conservation areas that were acquired with open space funds from the federal government. And when that program was developed in the 1960s, I have a very interesting picture. First Selectman Sullivan took his desk up to Lake Mohegan, and they brought the papers up and they took pictures of him, because he was pursuing all these. I should send it to you. It's a classic picture that they were pursuing the monies to acquire more properties at Lake Mohegan and elsewhere. Yeah, that the open mine stuff.
Well,
The history is very interesting of the open space areas.
I hear you I agree with you. I just think that there is room for clarification here.
Right.
That would be useful for all concerned.
Right.
If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck.
Well, we'll see what Mr. Baldwin says and what his opinions are, and we'll take a look at that other letter and see if there are any questions that still remain that need to be answered. And, the good news is you guys have made great progress. George?
I just received a response from the Historic District.
Okay.
Would you like me to?
Yeah, sure, great.
Put it now, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, George. Attached, please find the pages from the Historic District Commission handbook regarding signage. I hope this is helpful. Also, it appears that the lower wharf was demolished recently without HDC approval, clearly a formality as it was in disrepair and for safety reasons probably needed to be demolished. But nevertheless, the approval from the commission is required. I would suggest applying for a certificate of appropriateness to demolish the existing wharf and to build a new wharf, assuming that is the plan.
And that's what had to be done with the Perry Green bulkhead. The town got the permits to rebuild it from DEEP and the Corps of Engineers, and they needed also to get historic district approval, which they said they just recently did.
Cer-
So, yeah, the historic district includes the lower wharf.
Certificate of appropriateness?
Yes. And this is from Adam Cliver, Chairman of the Historic District.
Do they have, is that a thing that they produce? A certificate of appropriateness? Any idea?
You apply for it. You submit an application or you tell them what you want to do, and you put it on an agenda and discuss it. So sorry to be talking so much. It's just very.
No, thank you, Jeff. So we need to get in touch with the HDC as well as Sasquatch.
Never easy, is it?
So you apply to them for a certificate of appropriateness to
Yep.
confirm the need to destroy that.
Right, they need to take it down.
Retroactively.
Well, if
I
that's,
guess we'll.
if that's what they
part-
want, I
fill the
mean,
process.
yeah. Any questions, any other comments?
We'll figure this out.
Yeah, we will figure it out.
Everybody's got their protocol and
Everybody's got-
procedure.
And part of the agreement to accept the property was that there would be an acknowledgement that Mr. Trez owned the property and consented to sell it to the town. So that's why his name is on the
On the
plaque
rock.
down there.
Right.
It was part of the agreement.
Right, right. Interesting. Thanks, George. Any other questions, comments?
Oh, and there was one thing.
Yep.
George alluded to the question that came up, and I think you've answered it, was are the remaining pilings a hazard, and should there be signage about that? And he says, we don't know. We would ask Brian. I think your answer is no. Okay.
Is one of the questions you've inquired via the town attorney, or is one of the questions you asked the town attorney, whether the Historic District Commission has jurisdiction over waterborne structures that are beyond the mean high water point? This
Great
goes to a
question.
Such as zoning, in representing municipalities, if you're building something in the water, zoning doesn't have jurisdiction over that. It may have access over the structure from the land to that, but not over the structure. It came out recently, for instance, right in Groton with the new building being built for the electric boat. So that may be a jurisdictional issue that,
What's the application that we're doing a permission of what?
Appropriateness.
We can object to the appropriateness of the request.
it is significant. It could be a jurisdictional issue, whether you do something, are you beyond the legal boundaries?
Beyond the pale.
Or District Commission where they have their jurisdictional boundaries.
But the historic district encompasses the waters of the harbor.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they have authority over it, but that's the way the district is drawn. It's the harbor and to the west, and it ends on the east shore of the harbor.
So we have another question for the town attorney.
Yes, interesting.
Which is,
The boats.
what's their role in this?
Well, does HDC have jurisdiction over the dock?
My boat's ugly.
You're most ugly, you're right. Passing judgment on boats.
So, any other thoughts, comments, suggestions, ideas? Okay. Sand management?
There's many things to talk about. The Corps of Engineers is the real estate section. They've got a draft plan together. They think, as I said last month, that they can make a good argument with DEEP that the material doesn't go on a town beach because the town beaches are filled with sand, and we demonstrated that with engineering department surveys. They're now dealing with, I'm hoping is the last question, and that has to do with property ownership, because they need access to the country club property to get to the site with some excavating equipment, and they also have to make a statement on the application to DEEP as to who owns the area that they're going to dredge. So interestingly, in talking with the Corps of Engineers, they've been looking at the town GIS maps, which quite interestingly show that the town owns the property where the country club's beach house is, which is not correct. So we're going to talk with them hopefully tomorrow, and Mr. Lehman, the surveyor, has it, but we're going to have to tell the Corps that these are not accurate maps. That probably go back many years to the time when the town did own that area, and the country club owned Sasko Beach. But there was a property transfer, I think it was in the 1960s. So those town GIS maps, again, show the barrier beach and the area of the swimming pool and of the country club's beach house as town property. And of course, if that was the case, then the Corps of Engineers wouldn't need any easements to get through it. But so we have to work that out. And like everything else, things go slowly.
Yeah, but if I can ask a question, in order to work it out, do they need, definitive meets and bounds, or can it be resolved by a simple, meeting between this commission and perhaps the country club, where we present to the Army Corps the combined position that the portions of the harbor that are going to be dredged are within the ownership and control of the federal government and or the state of Connecticut or the town of Fairfield, and the country club, which claims ownership over property adjacent thereto, is granting an easement for construction, and just leave it at that and not get into some, definitive decision as to who owns what up to where. They're clearly going to let us go on their property. If it's theirs, to the extent it's theirs, they'll let us on. Do we need to really decide if it's theirs, ours, or someone else's?
Well,
Not someone else's, theirs or ours. Just trying to keep it moving. I'm worried we're going to miss another dredging season because the bureaucracy is battling a battle they may not need to have.
I hear what you're saying, and I don't know the answer. I can't tell the Corps of Engineers what to do. I know their real estate section is looking at it, and I know we've also provided them with the historical documents that we've obtained, including the original act of Congress for building the jetty and building the wall, and then the subsequent action by the state legislature to, by deed of cession, transfer the underwater lands to the federal government to build the wall. And then we have the handwritten deed of cession from the governor of Connecticut to do it. And if that holds, which seems pretty straightforward, then the mound of sand has accreted against federal property and it's owned by the federal government. Well,
Right.
It does seem simple. But the other part of it is, when we work with the country club for these past two excavation projects with the public works, to pass over the country club's property to get to this area, we had a memorandum of agreement that was signed by the commission and the first selectman and the country club. For the Corps of Engineers to do it, it requires a legal easement. For the federal government to have access over someone's property, it has to be worked out. So
Could we assist at all in getting the easement by us, coordinating between the two? Because an easement, it's a temporary easement, forget the construction. A temporary construction easement, no more, no less. Easy to draft. You can draft one in 2 hours or less. Be done with it. It would.
Well, again,
I would think.
you know more than I. It sounds simple, but the Corps of Engineers has its requirements, and I can tell them that we're willing to. What can we do? The first thing is to make clear that these town GIS maps are incorrect, and I think that Mr. Lehman, the surveyor, can tell them that tomorrow. Mr. Hurley is on vacation this week.
The country clubs agreed to give the easement, correct? That's not the issue. Do we know?
We have to talk with them more, but as you know, the country club doesn't care about that sand spit. That's not the issue. But the issue is if we agree that the basis for determining the federal government owns that sand spit is that the federal government owns the strip of land against which the sand spit is accreted, then that opens up other issues having to do with ownership on the other side of that strip, which is described in the deed of cession as land that's not only covers the base of the wall and the jetty, but the land and water on both sides for a distance of 3 rods. So it's a complex issue that's been going on for all these years.
I mean, the
What
country
strip
club
is that? I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
Could you identify the strip on that map there?
Yep.
Let's see if I've got it. Oh, this is a better one.
Sort of cut off.
And again, the history of this is really fascinating, in my opinion. But the jetty and the wall that goes up the east side of the harbor, but those are navigation improvements, and they were authorized by the federal government in 1829, and it followed a survey that was done in 1826 or 1827 to build these navigation improvements. At the time, the country club wasn't there. It was called the Sunken Ground, and it was all tidelands and open water. So when the federal government authorized the building of this, and according to the plan that was put together by the Army engineers, just like the lighthouse properties, federal government needed the state property interest to build them, because the underwater lands are held in trust by the state of Connecticut for the public. So right after that 1829 act, there was a special act of the Connecticut legislature, just as there was with building lighthouses and other places, to authorize the governor. And I believe it was Governor Tomlinson, who had been previously the school here is named after him, and was a Fairfield citizen. But the legislature passed a law authorizing the governor by deed of cession. And the definition of that is when a government transfers property from, to another government entity. Authorized the governor by deed of cession to transfer the state's interest in the underwater lands to the federal government for the purpose of building these structures. And then right after that, the governor wrote out, we have this from the state library, really interesting, handwritten stuff, that the governor wrote out the deed of cession. I hereby, as authorized by the General Assembly, by deed of cession, transferred to the federal government the state's interest in doing this. But it was not just for the width of this. It was for the width of this plus a distance of 3 rods, 3 times 16 on both sides. And then this was built. The country club wasn't established until 1914 or 1915. So this existed long before the country club was.
So that, based upon that interpretation, those are federal.
Yes, because Connecticut case law specifies that if property accretes against the shore, it accretes to the owner of the property against which it accretes against. And if this is federal property, then this accretes against that. But the issue has always been, if you base it on this, then this is all federal property for a distance of 3 rods on both sides, and you open up what some people call a can of stuff.
It was transferred from the state
to the federal government.
It's just like the bottom lands of like a lighthouse, that's state property.
Yes.
And then like with the Penfield Light, that's owned by the Coast Guard, or, because, I mean, it's, but bottom lands are this.
Those lighthouses are interesting, they're different.
Yeah.
Some of them were transferred from the state with the understanding that the transfer was good as long as the federal government operated a lighthouse, and then it would go back to the state. But in this instance, it was just the deed of cession.
Yeah, so, I mean, to me, based upon that, it's clearly federal property.
Well, that's what those old documents would indicate. And so the reason for having to determine that is, since now before the federal government was only dredging the channel, and had a 75-foot width, and it was dredging whatever sloughed in. Federal government didn't have to make a statement as to who owned this. They were dredging the channel, and then they had a right to do that.
Because it's a federal
navigation channel, yes. But now, if our hopeful project, which is done in the best way possible, goes through, we're taking more of this area, which is above mean high water, and we're excavating it. And the Corps has to make a statement as to who owns the property that we're working on.
And based upon what you shared, you could make a strong case that it's the federal government.
Yes, we just shared the documents. And if you go to the website, the Harbor Commission's website, we did put together a presentation with describing this process. But it's fascinating, because this is one of the earliest federally designated navigation projects in the country. I think it's the second or third in Connecticut and the 10th in New England. And the ones in New England were the earliest ones in in the country. So well, anyway, the history, and we were able to get this recently from the state library because all these old documents now have been scanned. And we had, previously, we got the documents, but we had to go up and use a camera to take a picture of them. Very, well, anyway, that doesn't answer your question, though, about how to move it forward faster.
If one were to take a shovel and dig, am I correct, you would find that structure under the sand?
Oh, yes.
I mean, that seems like an easy, can't this federal government just declare it and it's ours? It's clearly theirs.
You're right.
I mean, you don't have to get
Right.
the consent of someone.
Right.
I don't have to get the consent of my neighbor that I can sell my house because that's my property. It's mine.
Right.
I just get frustrated with the harbor silts in more and more and.
Okay, so based upon that barrier, if you find that, then it makes it very, very
That's
clear.
connected.
Right.
As Jeff will tell you, that's always been connected. There used to be a straight line there.
And that's the strip that you were referring to,
When it
right?
was
That
first
little-
built, when it was first built, there was a gap here. But then later in the 1800s, that gap was closed. So this is one, and the reason for doing this wall was to sort of channel or direct the flow of the river so it didn't spread out over the marshland, and the flow of the river would help maintain the channel. But we've been working on this since 1990 or thereabouts. Well, we did have one dredging project by the Corps. So I'll talk with you, Brian. I'll communicate with the Corps project manager tomorrow.
We're all frustrated by this.
But we had back in 1990, when did it start? 94. We had approval. We had money from Congress to restore the 100-foot width of the sandbar. But DEP at the time objected. They said it was a significant habitat for the threatened plants, and it was well, anyway, it's a long story.
So you're going to chat with Army Corps tomorrow too?
Yes. But clearly the town map that they're working with is incorrect because it shows that the town owns.
If we get a meeting, or at least a Zoom, if not a live meeting.
Brian's idea, we should at least try to propose that and see if the worst that can happen is they say no, but we could try.
All right, so let's ask for a meeting to discuss the ownership then.
Yeah.
To see if we can just get an agreement that's more generalized for a temporary.
Right. A temporary easement without to get
Right.
That's
Right.
done.
Sounds like it would be in the country club's benefit to play ball with.
Exactly.
Oh, and the country club is willing. I mean, they're not resisting, right, wouldn't you say?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the Corps. It's the Corps has got
And it
other
may be-
priorities, I mean, clearly. And this is moving much more slowly. We've known for 2 years that the money has been appropriated and that this is their plan. And we still don't have a date for the dredging. So it's like beyond frustrating. Beyond frustrating. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Warren, Mooring Committee?
Yeah, I think my report has been preempted by the harbor master's report. So I don't really have anything, except the only other thing we discussed was whether we really, monthly meetings are really necessary. So I think the conclusion we came to is I'll try to assess the need on a monthly basis. And I'll contact people about agenda items and take it from there. So I don't have meetings if they're unnecessary.
Great. No need to have them if they're unnecessary, absolutely. Any questions? Okay, new business. The proposal for the Exide property. Just briefly, Don was there in person, I was there by WebEx at the TPZ meeting where the developer presented a potential proposal for development of that property. Public comment was not allowed, but the commissioners had lots of good questions. Our role, if any, would be to work with the developer on what the open space would be like and if there are any requirements in the final agreement between DEEP and Exide, make sure that those requirements were met. Several of the commissioners, the TPZ commissioners, ask that the developer please get in touch with us and the Shellfish Commission, Conservation Department, and others who had been involved, Fair Plan, I guess, Mill River Wetlands Committee, to find out and discuss what the open space should look like. But without going into I don't know, Don, do you have anything you want to add?
The plan was described as conceptual plan.
Right.
That's the kind of warm up to get initial gut reaction from P&Z and others in town government, perhaps. I did bump into a P&Z commissioner who felt that would be coming forward sooner rather than later as a formal application. She said that possibly as early as August 22nd. I haven't looked to see the agenda, if it's on that agenda, but she understood that it was going to be coming up sooner rather than later.
Interesting.
That's the only thing I can tell you.
Jeff?
The article in the newspaper was interesting because when you read it, it sounded like just another development proposal for the Post Road. There was a mention at the end of the article that there was remediation that took place here. But this property was the subject of remediation issues for many, many years. And when the remediation was completed, it was, I don't know how you define it precisely, but it was generally considered the largest environmental remediation project in town history. So there's those considerations, I think, have to be thought of when planning for redevelopment of this property. Now, I do have the inland wetlands permit that was granted for the upland remediation. And
where's the upland? I'm sorry.
Well, this is as you know, this was the Exide battery plant. And I forget when it started in 1950 and it closed in 1980. And there's a tremendous history of what took place here. And the mistake that was made by Exide Company is they first started to remediate the river. They excavated sediment from the river with the lead contamination. And then the next step was to remediate the upland, the old factory site and the soil. They recontaminated the river. So then the most recent project that was finished in 2017 the success of that was due in large part to the involvement of the Harbor Management Commission and also Fair Plan and the Shellfish Commission involved with that. So that was a tremendously successful project to excavate, essentially dredge the contaminated sediment from the river, pump it onto the site into those big geotubes that you saw, let the water drain out, and then they cut up the bags and took the stuff to landfills. A tremendous project. And now, but it was also, the Harbor Commission had a role because what took place there affected the harbor. So I think we need to make the argument that the development proposal here has to be formally referred to the Harbor Management Commission, just like the Perry Green project should have been referred. It's a land use approval by TP&Z. It affects the harbor. It requires a formal review and comment by the Harbor Management Commission. And the developer can come in and talk about the public access. But the question now is what type of access should it be? And there's a bulkhead there now, as you can see. And my recollection is that bulkhead was meant to be temporary for the purpose of the remediation project. It would have had to have been permitted by DEEP as part of the remediation project. DEEP is now searching its files to see if there are any conditions having to do with that. Because some people have said that they understood that the condition of that bulkhead was a condition of the permit, was that it was to be removed and the shoreline was to be restored to a natural condition. So that DEEP is looking at that now, but that all affects the public access. Where will people park? Who will own it? Will it be transferred to the town? Will it be, will there be an easement of some sort? But I think the commission has to, since the commission was so instrumental in completing that remediation, should have a role in discussing all this.
Just one comment, I would say everything that you're saying was also said by Commissioner Harrison. And to a degree by two other commissioners who all recognize everything you're saying and pointed it out to the developer. Doesn't mean that we don't have to keep repeating that and keep pointing out, but they made very clear to the developer, TBG, I think, and I believe this is land, if I'm not mistaken, I think TBG is the developer, but I think Mr. Lenosi is the owner of the property. If I'm not mistaken on that. And they made very clear that going forward, the developer needs to dialogue with us, with the Conservation Commission, and others. I have to say, I was a little taken back by the developer's response, which is, oh, we'll talk to whoever we have to talk to, but we thought we could deal with you. And they would like to deal with as few commissions as they can. I wonder why. But I think I left the room feeling comfortable that people on the commission are going to keep reminding me of this place.
I agree. I agree with that.
The commissioners you mentioned are very active in the fair plan group, so they certainly know the history of this. One of the things, also some questions, if they're going to start excavating into this property, there needs to be probably monitoring during the work and after the work, and there's a lot to consider here.
The conceptual plan calls for kind of a walkway along that bulkhead area, making it public open space for parking and all that other good stuff.
The TPZ, they have the board with the condition for approval on not just what the developer wants to do, but what's in the best interest of the public.
There's a whole bunch of people in my neighborhood. So, all of these people here, my neighbors, were watching it closely. They'll be speaking, they'll be going to meetings and making their...
That's South Pine Creek that's on the top of that?
Yeah.
And where's Martell?
That's right. Martell's is right.
Yeah, that's what I thought, Martell.
This is the corner, this is Geronimo, so this is
Yep.
North Pine Creek and South Pine Creek. This is the old Fairfield lumber property on Thorpe Street.
Yep.
This is 95, this is my street, Henderson, and Riverhurst is all back here,
Yep.
coming into here.
I went to check out that parking lot behind but it doesn't seem continuous, because it's fenced in. It's
Behind Martell's?
Yeah,
That's behind it.
yeah, because you can't access that body of water through Martell. I mean, I don't know who put the fence up, but you don't.
Where does the open space portion of that whole property begin and end? I mean, is the gray versus the grass area that's open?
I think that...
It sounds like a laid out area. I don't think
Yeah.
there's any open space.
It's-
What are they contemplating for open
What are
space?
they-
Is it the
It
whole?
was a
Quarter of
long...
an acre.
What's that?
They have a quarter of an acre
That's
in
not
the
very much.
No.
It's pretty
No,
skinny, huh?
no,
Strip
yeah,
right there.
yeah,
It's very close to
Yeah.
shore, right?
yeah.
Well, how do you access that? Because you can't get there from the
Well,
post
now
road
you
from
can't.
Martell.
Those are the things that,
Yeah,
There's no
exactly,
access.
exactly.
And I went around the street behind there, and there was, maybe it was one of the streets behind there, and you could access a small body of water. I don't know if it was contiguous with that area, but certainly there's no access from the post road nor from Martell.
Right.
The concept plan calls for 98 units of housing, most of it kind of luxury housing, some of it affordable housing, and then retail space too. So, where does retail space and open space parking start and stop? I don't know, but there will be public parking there.
Underneath, probably, I guess.
Well, there's going to be retail. The proposal that we saw was for retail on the ground floor, housing above it.
Is it similar to the development on Commerce Drive? Is that the same? Yeah, so again, I would envision it very much like that.
I think so.
You know.
It actually, aesthetically, it looked a little nicer than that.
It'll probably be high, I mean,
Oh,
Very
high end,
yeah,
high end,
like I would,
high end.
Rental units only at the moment.
yeah.
Yeah.
With storage on, it's zoned, two different zoning, designations.
Right.
So in the commercial, in the industrial they have the storage, and in the commercial, they have the
I think the storage is like over
the storage
here,
is over there,
and the
yeah.
residential is along
Yeah.
here, and the parking,
Yeah.
I think, is like over
Yeah.
here.
And that's that office building there, Brian, at the top there?
Yeah,
north?
yeah, the white, yeah.
If it's a quarter of an acre total, and presumably the open space runs all along the water, it's not gonna be very wide, it's gonna be a strip,
Right.
right?
Right.
There's no way to launch a kayak or get.
It's
No,
not the
exactly,
width of a kayak,
exactly.
it's not gonna be very wide to be that
Well,
length of that water line.
The developer had no intention of having any boats
Yeah,
land or launch.
They make it
from
very
there.
clear, they made very clear that liability was a big concern for them. And actually, as a kayaker, that, the kayaking is kind of minimal there on the Mill River, you can only go so far.
Right,
And then there's a dam at the other end. So
Right.
the kayak, it's not like optimal kayaking
Right.
space.
You see
Right.
kayaks up here, here to, in Mill Hollow Park, coming
Right.
into here, and you see them down here, obviously.
Right.
There are not many even here in the harbor.
Right.
but in any event, the developer really didn't have a whole lot to say about the open space, because he didn't know anything about it. And the commissioners who were very interested in what he was planning on doing, didn't have enough information about what the agreement was between DEEP and Exide and the town and parties. So it's kind of up in the air at this point, subject to, the commissioners' request to him to come see us and see other groups. So, I presume we will be hearing, especially if it's anticipated that he's going to move ahead with a formal plan, I would expect to hear from him fairly
And
shortly.
I think the commissioners that you mentioned will make sure that it's formally referred to the commission.
Yeah.
This commission for review.
We're getting heads up from those people.
Right, I think so. But just so you all have the background, and, when we hear from him, we'll ask him to attend.
And it's a fascinating history of how this remediation came about and how Exide objected to it, back in when the plant closed. And one of the events that moved the DEP at the time to make orders against Exide was someone found an animal, dead animal that inhabits, I forget the type of animal that inhabits the river, but it was a distance away from the river. So the conservation director at the time took it to the New Haven Agricultural Experiment Station. They did an autopsy on it, and it was filled with lead. And so that was one of the incidents, one of the things that convinced DEEP to finally take action, even though Exide was arguing that there wasn't a problem.
What year was that?
I'll have to go back, I have all that.
Roughly like,
Interesting.
Oh,
90, they were already testing, like by 90, 89, I went to my house in 89.
this was in the 80s.
So
yeah.
94, they were putting monitoring wells along Henderson.
oh, really?
And they were concerned, at that point, they were trying to see how far the lead went. They went into all the neighborhoods around to see, and they didn't find any in the streets, but they were getting concerned. They ended up dredging the whole river, and from Riverhurst, they went all the way up to Mill Hollow Park by Bronson there, and dredged that as well. But it didn't expand beyond the river, so they were in there,
And one more story, I ran into a fellow, passed away now, who came to the United States from Cuba with his family. Father had a job during World War II or just after in Bridgeport. And so this guy grew up in Bridgeport, and he told me when I was talking with him in just a chance discussion that he used to work at the Exide factory. I said, oh, that's really interesting. This is when we're going through all this stuff. And he said, yeah, we didn't realize what the issues were, but it was good money. And he said that regularly a doctor would come in and they would test the blood of the workers. And if lead was found to be high in the blood, they transferred the place where they worked in the plant to an area of the plant that wasn't as exposed to lead, and the doctor would tell them, oh, don't worry, it'll go down. But anyway, it's a very, very interesting history of what took place there.
Awful,
That's why we have OSHA now.
awful. Any other questions, comments?
Just think, that whole road, we had DuPont Chemical a few blocks away, we had Exide Battery, we still have Stern Ruger. People forget that this was a manufacturing site.
Right.
That was, when we bought our house, those places were all operating. Stern Ruger still is, but.
Right.
And Martell's, which is now this lovely restaurant, was a shot and beer place called Ann Suburban. It was a really rough bar.
Interesting. Any other new business anybody wants to bring up?
Yeah, just,
Bill.
an event that, I think would be of interest to the commission and the public. The Coast Guard Auxiliary, Flotilla 77 is hosting a safe boating course on August 26th at the Flotilla base, which is located at South Benson Marina. It'll take place from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. The cost is $50. They're conducted every couple months. In full disclosure, I'm the public affairs officer for Flotilla 77, so to be completely transparent, it's my job to publicize, but I thought it might be of interest to those on the commission or the listening public. And on an uplifting note, I officiated a wedding at the Lower Wharf on Saturday. It was a delightful day, and a lovely young couple got married, and they are not from Connecticut, so they thought it was just a perfect venue. I think you spoke to them some time ago as well. Yeah, so anyways.
Very cool.
Officiated?
I did, yeah.
In what capacity?
I'm the Justice of the Peace.
Oh, wow. Weddings by the Water, I think is his.
Weddingsbythewater.com.
Did you say, is it gonna be at the Coast Guard building?
It's gonna be a Flotilla 77 at South Benson Marina. It's, the fee is $50.
On what day?
August 26th.
August
Yeah,
26th.
From 9 a.m.
I
to
could
4 p.m.
I could send a message out for anyone.
Yeah, I've got a flyer too.
Let's do an email.
Perfect.
Last email,
Yeah.
then they can just contact me and then I'll.
Yeah, and I was remiss, I was gonna send out to Brenda for the town website, but we did it a couple months ago too.
This is for the state approved, like state.
A safe voting course, yes, so you get your certificate of personal
Someone
watercraft.
just asked me last weekend for their child to come back. They had a young man, they want to get one for the child so he can operate the boat.
Oh, great, yeah.
Great, excellent.
That's people on the
Yeah.
waiting list, that would be a smart thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So I'll get that, I'll send that to everyone.
super. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Any other new business? Jeff?
Sorry to be talking so much. There's another significant matter that the TP&Z is in the process of updating the town's plan of conservation and development. And right now, look at the draft. It doesn't include any reference to Southport Harbor or the harbor. I mean, the harbor management plan is separate and distinct from what's called the POCD. But that doesn't mean the POCD couldn't reference the harbor management plan and support its implementation and recognize the importance of the plan to Southport Harbor, or to the town, Southport Harbor to the town. So my thought is that we should prepare maybe discuss it next month, a submittal to TP&Z concerning Southport Harbor, and that our recommendation is that the POCD recognize the harbor management plan and support its implementation. There's also no reference in the POCD that I could find.
What's the POCD again?
Plan of Conservation and Development.
Okay.
So that's like the town master plan. And it's a separate and distinct from the harbor management plan, but it covers the whole town.
It's not the zoning regs, it's a guidance document. So if the zoning commission is looking to change zone boundaries or to change the zoning or to approve certain projects, they look for guidance and consistency with the town management, the POCD basically.
Just to be consistent with that.
We should also make clear that the responsibility of the Harbor Management Commission to make comments on land use applications that affect the harbor, such as Exide and such as the lower, the Perry Green. So I think it's also, we didn't see in the draft POCD references to the town's shellfish management plan or open space plan. So I think there'll be discussion about the part of the POCD that deals with conservation needs to be strengthened.
Great, let's comment, absolutely. And that's really too bad, because they had 3, 4 town-wide meetings that went on. Each session was a week, and the people from town were invited, and I went to one that was, I mean, there must have been 75 people there. So, right, and you, right, yeah. So, they had lots of input, but let's do that. Any other comments, questions, new business? Anybody from the public have a comment?
Well done again, Madam Chairman. Thanks to all. Good night.
Good night, Pat. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone else from the public? Hearing no other public comment, no other new business, could I have a motion to adjourn? Jack? Second?
Second.
Jeff? All in favor? Aye. See you all on September 19th.